I never thought I'd hear his voice again. Not after everything he did, but on an ordinary Thursday morning, while I was pouring tea into my chipped ceramic cup, my phone lit up with a name I had deleted years ago. Liam. My fingers froze. For a second, I didn't breathe. I stared at the screen, as if expecting it to disappear. But the call kept ringing, and before I could stop myself, I answered. There was silence on the other end. The kind of silence that carries weight. Then his voice, low, shaken, unsure, said my name like it was a memory. Elena, just that. No greeting, no apology, no context. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He cleared his throat. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say something. Something I should have said a long time ago. I still said nothing, he continued. I chose her. But it was you I regretted losing. Every day, my grip on the phone tightened, and just like that, I was no longer in my kitchen. I was back in the tiny one-bedroom apartment we once shared. Back to the nights we stayed up talking about dreams we couldn't afford. Back to the time I believed love could survive anything, even poverty, even struggle, as long as we were together. Liam wasn't always this uncertain. There was a time his voice held fire, the kind that made you believe in impossible things. He had dreams of becoming a journalist. I was the one who helped him build his portfolio, editing articles late into the night, encouraging him after every rejection letter. We were a team. I worked 2 part-time jobs just so he could focus on his writing. He called me his anchor, said he'd never let go of the one person who kept him steady. But anchors, it seems, are heavy, and people chasing the stars don't like being weighed down. I remember the day I found out. He came home late. His cologne was different, his eyes wouldn't meet mine. I asked if something was wrong. He said he was just tired. But his phone lit up later that night, a message from Amelia. Thanks for tonight, I can still taste the wine on your lips. I didn't cry, not that night. I simply turned off the phone and went to sleep beside him, without saying a word. But something in me broke quietly. The kind of break you don't fix with time or forgiveness. 2 weeks later, he told me that he was offered a job at a prestigious media firm, one that Amelia's father owned. That he needed to focus on his future. That being with me reminded him of where he started, not where he was going. So he left, with a suitcase of pressed shirts, a new cologne, and not a single glance back. I stayed behind. In the apartment we both picked, the one with peeling wallpaper and a broken heater. The one that still smelled like burnt toast and old coffee. And while he climbed corporate ladders and posed for gala photos with Amelia on his arm, I was rebuilding. Quietly, painfully, alone. But I'll get to that part later. For now, all you need to know is when Liam said my name that morning, something shifted. Not in my heart, that had gone quiet long ago. But in my soul, because for the first time in 3 years he wasn't the voice I missed, he was the voice I had outgrown. After that call, I didn't sleep, not because of what Liam said, but because I was remembering the version of myself who once would have cried over it, who would have clung to those words, like they were lifelines, who would have believed that regret meant redemption. But I'm not her anymore. Not the girl who waited at train stations with coffee and second chances. Not the one who believed that effort was love, and that sacrifices meant security. That girl? She died quietly, the day I watched Liam walk away, choosing legacy over loyalty, champagne over cheap instant noodles, status over sincerity. But I remember her. I remember how she tucked in her insecurities behind polite smiles. How she gave so much of herself until there was nothing left to hold. She was there the day Liam introduced Amelia. It was 3 months after the breakup. I was working as a freelance editor in a small publishing agency, and our firm got invited to a private networking dinner, hosted by one of the city's top media houses. That media house, it was owned by Amelia's family, and of course Liam was there, dressed in a sleek navy suit, hair slicked back, eyes scanning the room like he belonged. Amelia clung to his arm in a red backless gown, elegant, effortless, expensive. When our eyes met across the room, I expected pain, but all I felt was tired. He smiled, like nothing had happened, as if he didn't leave me with unpaid bills and a heart full of unanswered questions. He raised his glass from across the room, a silent toast. I looked down at my half-eaten canapé, and back up with a steady gaze. I didn't raise my glass. After that night, I made a decision. I would no longer be the girl waiting to be seen. I would no longer water dead gardens, hoping they would bloom out of guilt. So I left the city, moved into a smaller town by the coast, where people smiled with their eyes and coffee shops remembered your name. I rented a studio above a bookstore. The window overlooked the sea, and every morning I woke up to silence, the kind that doesn't ache, the kind that feels like peace. I picked up old dreams like forgotten books from dusty shelves, started writing again, poems, journals, observations. Eventually those turned into articles. Those articles turned into columns, and those columns turned into a full-time writing contract. I rebuilt, quietly, steadily, no social media fanfare, no parties or praise, just progress, the kind of progress that doesn't scream, it whispers, but it echoes. So when Liam called me 3 years later and said I was his biggest regret, I wasn't flattered, I wasn't bitter, either. I was simply aware of the weight of his words, because regret doesn't mean love, it means loss, and sometimes, people only realize what they lost when they see it thriving without them. A few days after that call, Liam messaged again. This time, it was a photo, a snapshot of a poem I wrote 2 years ago, one that had quietly gone viral. It was passed around in healing circles, shared by women learning how to leave, quoted in cafe readings, and printed in soft fonts over sepia-toned Instagram posts. Beneath the image, Liam wrote just 4 words. I didn't know Elena. I stared at it for a long time. Not the message, but the poem. I had almost forgotten I'd written it. It was about a girl who gave everything to someone who didn't notice until she stopped giving. A girl who thought love was about proving you were worth staying for. A girl who learned the difference between being chosen and being convenient. Funny how pain you once wrote to survive becomes someone else's compass later. I didn't reply, not because I was trying to punish him, but because silence had become my closure. He wasn't reaching out for forgiveness, he was reaching out to be remembered, and I had already let go of that version of myself, the one who needed to be understood by the person who hurt her. Months passed. Then one morning, I received an invitation in the mail, an exclusive publishing event in the city, the kind I used to dream about, the kind we once talked about late at night, when we were still us. It was being sponsored by one of the largest media firms in the region, the firm Amelia's family owned. Liam would be there. For a moment I considered skipping it. I didn't want to stir up old feelings, but I reminded myself, I wasn't going for him, I was going for the woman I had become. So I went. I wore a soft navy blue dress, hair tied loosely at the nape of my neck, minimal makeup, no need to impress, just presence. I walked into the hall quietly, no drama, no entrance music, just stillness, and yet, all eyes turned, including his. Liam stood near the back, a drink in hand, laughing at something someone said, but the laughter didn't reach his eyes, and when he saw me, his whole posture shifted. He looked surprised, awkward, even a little haunted, like he was seeing someone he didn't think still existed, or maybe someone he hoped didn't. He walked toward me, slow, uncertain, like he was approaching something sacred he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch anymore. Elena, he said softly.
You look.
I didn't let him finish. I smiled gently, with all the calmness I had learned in my years away. I know, I said. I look like someone you used to know, and I did. I looked like a woman who had nothing left to prove. After the event, he followed me out. The hallway was quieter, dimly lit, the kind of quiet where truths wait to surface. Elena, please, he said, stepping in front of me. I stopped walking, not because I wanted to hear him, but because I didn't need to run anymore. He looked at me with the face I once loved, the one I memorized like a storybook. But it didn't move me. Not this time. I made a mistake, he whispered. I stayed silent. I thought I was choosing the right path. Amelia had the life I wanted, the connections, the world I dreamed of. He paused, searching my eyes for some version of softness, but I didn't realize I left behind the one person who actually believed in me before anyone else did. His voice cracked slightly, and still, I stood still. I didn't come here to hurt him. I came to honor the girl who would have fallen apart hearing those words, the girl who once prayed for him to say exactly that, and now that he had, I felt nothing. I didn't come here to make you feel bad, Liam, I said quietly. I didn't even come here for you. He looked confused. I met his eyes without flinching. I came for the woman who thought your absence would destroy her, just to show her she survived. His gaze dropped. He looked like he had swallowed something sharp. Do you ever think about what we had? He asked. I gave him the softest smile. I think about the girl who loved you, and how hard she tried to make something work that had already fallen apart. He started to speak again, but I gently raised my hand. You don't get to miss me now, Liam. You let me go. And with that, I turned and walked away, not because I was running from something, but because I was finally walking toward myself. I returned to the coast that night. The ocean air felt different, lighter, almost as if the wind knew I'd finally let go of something heavy. Not because Liam's words had changed anything, but because I had released the last piece of him I'd been carrying, the need to be missed, the need to be chosen, the need to hear that he regretted leaving. I didn't need it anymore. The next morning, I made my favorite breakfast: sourdough toast, soft eggs, black coffee. I lit a candle by the window as sunlight spilled into the kitchen, warm and golden, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Not the kind that comes from answers, but the kind that arrives when you no longer need them. I had spent so many years trying to be enough for someone who didn't even know what enough looked like. Now I didn't need to be anyone's favorite. I just needed to be my own. Work kept growing. My writing found new homes, printed in small magazines, quoted in quiet classrooms, bookmarked in therapy journals. Readers began to reach out. Your words helped me leave. I cried through your last column. Thank you for showing me it's okay to start over. And slowly, I began to understand. Liam didn't just lose me. He lost the future I had carried for both of us, the stability I offered, the loyalty I gave freely, and now he was watching it bloom in someone else's garden, mine. A few months later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Liam and Amelia had broken up. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know, because healing isn't about staying curious, it's about learning how to let go, even of the urge to look back. Then one rainy afternoon, nearly a year after our last encounter, an email arrived. The subject line was simple: just one last thing from Liam. I paused. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't even feel intrigued. I just felt still. I opened it anyway. He'd written, Elena, I won't ask for anything. I know I've lost the right to even say your name, but I saw your interview last week. You were breathtaking, calm, wise. You've become everything I always believed you could be, when I wasn't strong enough to stand beside you. I'm not writing to come back. I just wanted you to know. Every time I see you now, I see the life I could have had. I read it once, then again, and then I closed it. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer did. His words didn't feel like closure. They felt like echoes, like a soft knock on a door I had already locked from the inside. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That kind of grief doesn't deserve a curtain call. That kind of regret doesn't earn a seat at the table I built with my own hands. That night, I lit a small candle on my writing desk, the same one I used to keep beside our bed in that old apartment. It was half used, scentless now. I stared at the flickering flame, then quietly blew it out, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Because not every ending needs thunder. Some just need a steady hand, and the strength to never light that flame again. People think closure comes from dramatic goodbyes, teary conversations, or long-awaited apologies. But real closure, it comes the morning you wake up and don't think of them. It comes in the quiet laughter you no longer hold back. It's in the way you move through the world without looking over your shoulder. That's when I knew I was free, not of Liam, but of the version of myself that waited for him. A year after his last message, I visited the city one final time, not for him, but for me. There was a gallery exhibit featuring artwork inspired by writing. One of the artists had painted a girl standing at a train station, a lone suitcase by her side, eyes forward. The train had already left, but behind her, the sun was rising. The painting was based on a column I wrote. The artist was 19. She said she had never been in love before, but she could feel her mother's heartbreak in my words. That's when I realized something powerful. Liam didn't regret me. He regretted what I represented. I was the mirror he wasn't ready to look into, the one that showed him who he really was, and who he chose to be. He didn't lose a girlfriend. He lost the opportunity to grow. He chose a version of love that was easier, softer, less demanding. But comfort doesn't teach you anything. And I grew. I learned. I healed. And I wrote my way home. Now when someone tells me they regret leaving me, I don't feel flattered. I feel sad, for them. Because regret isn't about love. It's about realizing too late what love required. It's strange how the people who made you feel invisible end up being the ones who teach you how to see yourself. Not through their eyes, but your own. I still walk alone sometimes, down the old pier, where I once called Liam after his first rejection letter. I go there to remember her. The girl who stayed loyal through everything, who begged softly, who gave too much, and who finally left, not with vengeance, but with grace. These days life is quieter, not because it's easy, but because I'm no longer in constant war with myself. I no longer seek proof that I'm worthy. I simply know I am. There's no rage, no bitterness, no aching need to be chosen. There's just peace, and that, I've learned, is the loudest victory of all. I don't think Liam ever hated me. I think he hated what I made him realize, that loving someone deeply isn't about staying. It's about showing up even when it's hard. He couldn't do that, so he left. And now, if he ever tells someone, she's the one that got away, let him romanticize the girl he once knew. Because the version he regrets losing is the version I fought to reclaim. And now, I belong to me. That's not a comeback. That's a rebirth. The first time I truly felt peace, it wasn't during a sunset. It wasn't on a beach. It wasn't even in silence. It was during a conversation I almost didn't have, with a girl I barely knew, in a place I once feared stepping back into. It started with an invitation, an email from a university I had spoken at 2 years ago. We're launching a mentorship program for women rebuilding their lives after trauma. We'd like you to lead the first session. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I didn't want to do it, but because part of me still felt strange being called a mentor. I used to be the one riding through heartbreak at 3 a.m., asking myself why I wasn't enough. Now people were asking me how I became whole again. But I said yes, not because I felt ready, but because I finally had something to offer that came from a place deeper than pain, something honest. The session was small. 7 women, different faces, different stories, but the same exhausted eyes. The eyes of women who had once tried to love someone more than themselves. One girl, Anya, barely 22, didn't speak for the entire first hour. She kept her notebook close, writing instead of talking. When I gently asked her if she wanted to share, she didn't look up. She just read, "He said I was everything he needed, until I stopped needing him. Then I was too much." I used to think healing made me difficult, but now I think he only loved the broken version of me because she was easier to keep. The room fell still, the kind of silence that holds weight. I didn't try to answer right away, because I knew how it felt to write words like that. After the session, she found me in the hallway, holding her notebook like armor, her voice barely audible. "Did you really stop loving him?" she asked. I knew what she meant. What we all mean when we ask that. Does it ever stop hurting? I looked her in the eye, and said softly, "I didn't stop loving him. I just started loving myself more." Her shoulders dropped, like something had loosened inside her. Not everything, but enough to breathe. That night, I walked home under a light drizzle. I didn't carry an umbrella. I never liked them. I used to think the rain was a burden. Now I think it's just the sky helping us wash away what we didn't know we were still carrying. When I reached my apartment, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was Amelia. "I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted you to know. I left him. Not because of you, not even because of me, but because I realized the person he made me become was someone I no longer recognized." I read it twice, then I placed the phone down, face down, and walked away. Not to avoid it, just because. It didn't need anything from me, not my reaction, not my forgiveness, just silence. The next morning, I opened the windows wide. The city smelled of rain and beginning again. Somewhere deep inside, a voice said, "You don't have to be angry to be free." And I believed it. Months passed. Life settled into its own rhythm. Not exciting, not loud, but calm, steady. I taught a little more, wrote a little deeper, laughed more often. Until one day, an invitation arrived for a coastal retreat, 3 days with writers and artists who had once gotten lost and were learning to find themselves again. I wasn't going to speak. I was going to listen. The retreat was quiet. Ocean air, no phone signal, just old cottages and salt in the wind. That first evening we sat around a fire pit. People shared poetry, music, sketches. Someone passed around warm mulled wine. That's when I noticed him. Julian. He wasn't loud. He didn't dominate the room. He didn't ask me what I did. He asked me when I last cried from reading something beautiful. When I realized I wasn't waiting for someone to return. I don't know why. But I answered, maybe because he wasn't trying to fix me, just witness me. The next day we walked along the cliffs. He pointed at a small lighthouse and said, "Funny how lighthouses don't chase ships. They just shine." I smiled. "Are you calling me a lighthouse?" He grinned. "No, but you remind me of one." Later in the quiet of my cabin, I looked at myself in the mirror. No makeup. No filters. Just me, calm, present, whole. Julian didn't change my life. But he reminded me I had one. A few days later, as I unpacked my bag back home, I found a note tucked into a book. "For the girl who carries storms like secrets, I hope the world is kind to you. But more than that, I hope you are kind to yourself." I placed it in my journal, closed the cover, and whispered aloud, "I am." The first time I was invited to speak on a real stage, I almost said no. Not because I was scared, but because I wasn't sure I needed to be seen anymore. I had already survived, already healed. Did I still need to prove anything? But then I remembered the women who once sat in quiet rooms, clutching notebooks to their chests, whispering, "Will it ever stop hurting?" I remembered the version of me, who didn't know how to stop bleeding without making it a performance. So I said yes. The event was called Voices Rewritten, a theater full of people who had lived through some version of being abandoned, forgotten, broken. When they called my name, I walked on stage with no script, just memory. I opened with a single line, "I was once someone's second choice, but I refused to be my own." The room fell silent in the most sacred way. And then I told them my truth. Not about Liam, not about Amelia, but about Elena, the girl who stayed too long. The woman who finally walked away. The girl who once begged to be seen, and the woman who chose to see herself instead. When I stepped off stage, people cried. A woman in her 50s hugged me and whispered, "I thought I came here for my daughter. But I think I came here for me." A few days later, a package arrived at my door. No return label. Inside was a photograph, an old picture of Liam and me, in that tiny apartment, laughing over instant noodles. On the back, in handwriting I still recognized, it said, "I hope you found the warmth I couldn't give you." I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I placed the photo gently in a box, and slid it into the back of my bookshelf, not to forget, but to honor, because healing doesn't always mean erasing, it means archiving with care. A week after that, I stood at a lakefront cabin, leading a small retreat for women starting over. 10 women, 1 weekend. And the promise that they could begin again. One woman asked me, "Do you ever wish it had turned out differently?" I smiled and said, "No, because if it had, I'd probably still be shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's love." Later that night, a young woman slipped me a note before bed. It read, "I thought I needed him, but after watching you, I realized I just needed me." That's when I understood the difference between healing and helping. Healing is silent. Helping is when your healing starts echoing in someone else's silence. That same evening, I took a walk near the lake and caught my reflection in the still water. I didn't recognize her right away. She looked calm, not cold, strong, but not in the survivor way, in the "I'm finally living" way. I hadn't spoken to Julian in a while. He had gone traveling, sending the occasional postcard. No pressure, no promises, just "I'm thinking of you," and somehow, that felt like more love than anything I had ever tried to earn. Before I left the retreat, I wrote in my journal, "There are no soulmates, only souls who meet us when we're ready. Some stay, some teach, some leave, and some remind us who we were before the world told us who to be." That was the version of love I wanted now. Not the kind that needed rescuing, but the kind that arrived when you no longer needed saving. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want pity. I didn't want Liam back. I just didn't want to disappear inside anyone else's story ever again, and I hadn't. I had finally written my own. The final moment came quietly, not with drama, no sudden apology, no voicemail at midnight, just a peaceful morning like any other. I made tea. The sun fell gently through the windows, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to revisit any of it. Not the questions, not the pain, not the regrets. I wasn't wondering whether he still thought about me, whether he still told people I was his biggest regret, because it didn't matter, not anymore. I wasn't his absence. I wasn't his memory. I wasn't even his lesson. I was mine. That same morning, I received an email from the editor of a major publication. "We're curating a series on emotional rebirth. We want you to close the series. I wrote an essay titled The Girl Who Was Left, and the Woman Who Chose Herself. It didn't mention him, not once. Because stories like mine don't need villains, they just need truth. When the article went live, I received hundreds of letters. One stood out, handwritten, mailed the old-fashioned way. Your words reached the version of me I buried in my 20s. I opened a window I had nailed shut for decades. Thank you for becoming a lighthouse. And maybe that was the point. I wasn't meant to be someone's forever. I was meant to become someone else's beginning. One weekend, I took a solo trip to the coast. I brought a blanket, a journal, and a stone I'd carried for years, the one I picked up the day he left. I sat near the ocean, let the waves speak, and after a while, I threw the stone into the sea, not for drama, not for closure, but for peace. I whispered, "You do not belong to this weight anymore." As I walked back up the sand, a soft wind followed me, not pushing, not chasing, just reminding me, "You are free." And I smiled, not because I had won, not because he had lost, but because this time, I chose myself, and this time, I stayed.